Hello, and welcome to the third part of the series, in which we'll see the correlation between morphology within biology and languages. To kick things off, I thought it might be good for us to have a little change in scenery. I reckon most of you are familiar with a user named Nephilim3. Apart from Pendleton, I've decided to also make him my bitch. Furthermore, this man is the most brainwashed and creepiest person I've ever come across, and you need to be convinced no further than after hearing the first 2 minutes and 15-second dribble of his video about morphology. Ah, yeah, morphology. Tell us about it, Nephi.
This video is about morphology. The definition of morphology in the Webster's Medical Dictionary is form and structure. Not form or structure, form and structure. Evolutionists attempt to try to get around the fact that if evolutionary change were to take place, it would relate to morphology, by putting forth all kinds of jargon about nylonase bacteria, which of course is not evidence of evolution, or about immunities, things like this. They're really ridiculous. They do this because the fossil record of life does not convey that there has been morphological transition from one kind of living creature to another. A great many, dozens upon dozens of the most prominent scientists, mostly evolutionist scientists, in this world have stated in their own books that the fossil record of life does not show clear evidence of transition, that species appear abruptly and without predecessors. Now, when you quote an evolutionist scientist about this, an evolutionist will scream, quote mining, which is a ridiculous, childish rant. If they think that's a quote mine, whatever that is, there's no such thing as a quote mine, but if they think quoting an evolutionist scientist somehow takes them out of context, well, then they should stop quoting their own scientists. Stop believing what they say. If you don't believe what they say, then stop complaining when somebody else quotes them, if you don't, because you're going to claim you don't believe what they say. It's ridiculous. However, they have made those statements. The preponderance of them who have written books make that very statement. You see, evolution contends that from a single cell, from molecules, yes, and they claim abiogenesis is not evolution either, it is, from molecules evolved into a single-celled organism, and that single-celled organism evolved into the plethora of body plans, order, kingdom, phylum, genus, species of creatures that live in this world. That requires morphological change.
So he's saying morphology in biology has never been observed. Now, that's nothing new. I mean, we've heard this from this type for about 30 years now. Due to past events here on YouTube and the debate hassle, if you want to call it that, between Don Exodus 2 and Nephilim3, I've decided to step in and take the side of Don Exodus 2 by doing something he advised in one of his videos. In his video, Debating Creationists Part 2, he essentially recommends that whenever a creationist confronts you with some unfounded tosh, simply apply this to something entirely different. This usually exposes the fallacy of their argument, and per his request, that's what I'm doing, not only with this video, but within the entire series. So, if Nephi here says morphology has never been observed, let's apply this to something else, like, say, I don't know, the morphology of language and spelling. But in order to do that, we first have to look at the definition of morphology, as well as explore 3 drivers of evolution. Morphology in biology is defined as the study of physiological development of forms, eyes, wings, feet, etc., within organisms over time. The definition is also very largely the same in linguistics, though in this sense it's talking about the development of words and letters over time, as we'll see. The three drivers of biological as well as lingual evolution are mutation, isolation, and selection. Mutation usually works down at the letter level rather than the word level. A good example of such a spelling mutation is the so-called sharp S, which looks like this. This sharp S used to be spelled as SZ, which looks like this. Then, not so long ago, the sharp S, due to its pronunciation, was again changed, this time into a double S, as in Strasse instead of Straße. Of course, this doesn't mean that the sharp S is no longer used. Of course it is, and that's not what mutation means. Mutations are merely changes having no bearing whatsoever on the usage. This is where selection comes into play. In biology, this is inferred by genetic traits, which tend to be changed, kept, and spread if the environment of a specific organism changes. In languages, selection is determined by, as said, the usage of a word or letter pair of words that are spoken more often or tend to be kept more often than those that aren't. For example, the word after, as we've seen, hasn't changed since the 500s AD, and it's also present in the German after, which is another word for the anus. Other words in Anglo-Saxon died out very soon as the Anglo-Saxons came in touch with the Latin and Gaelic-speaking people in Britain, or Britannia, as it was called. Isolation is another important factor in biological as well as lingual evolution. In biology, this is inferred by the population genetics. Populations that stay put, don't migrate, and have no interactions with others will, of course, carry larger genetic diversity within their social network, family, communities, etc., than populations that do. It works the same way in language evolution. Populations that stay put, are isolated, or have isolated themselves will, of course, carry a larger linguistic diversity within their social network, family, communities, etc., than populations that aren't isolated and migrate continuously. So it's no surprise then that we find the greatest dialect diversity in Germany and Northern Europe, with more than 15 different dialects in Germany alone, and the largest language diversity in Central America, with about 30 different languages within the Mayan language family alone, which themselves descend from one or more ancient ancestors. Now that we have some insight into some of the factors of biological and language evolution, let's get back to morphology, eh? The examples of morphology in terms of spelling and pronunciation we're going to look at are the E, the TH, the G, and the Y. The first example in this round is the E. The morphology concerning this diphthong is more of a matter of pronunciation than spelling. In German and Anglo-Saxon, this diphthong is pronounced as E. As Old English then turned into Middle English, the E was dropped, leaving the A poor and defenseless, but still pronounced as E rather than A. In some cases, the E morphology of pronunciation has even managed to couple both the A and E in a word singular or plural state. For example, in the word Apfel, the German word for apple, the pronunciation of the A is A, whereas in Äpfel, the pronunciation is a clear E. The same goes for a number of nouns in German, for instance the word Acker, that's field in English, to Äcker, fields. In fact, In some cases, the morphology can even change the entire meaning of a word. For example, the German verb achten, which means to care, to look after. However, if you change the a to e, you get echten, which means the entire opposite, that being to look down upon or to despise. So as we've seen by this first example, minor developments in morphology within language, as well as in biological evolution, can, and often do, lead to large changes with large-scale effects within a breeding population, or, in this case, within the spelling, pronunciation, or even meaning of words. Hence, this concludes the first third of this third part. Meet me in the second, in which we'll discuss the th to t transition.